My name is Dr. Casey Allen. I am a lecturer in environmental and earth science at the University of West Indies in Barbados. And I'm part of this project with Ms. Cheryl Charles. We're looking at the effect that sea level rise would have on cemeteries and churchyards around Barbados. A lot of them are found, a lot of churches and graveyards here are found along the coast because that's where a lot of the population lives. So if sea levels continue to rise, then these important historic sites could be inundated.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kaylin Groom. I'm an independent scholar and educator with Arizona State University. I specialize in cultural stone decay and heritage science. So I'm here as an academic advisor to help answer questions and pose questions and just kind of add knowledge to where I can.
Hi there, I'm Brian Mormon. I'm a professor at the University of Calgary up in Canada, and I'm visiting Barbados and learning about all the research that's going on here at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill.
Climate change represents a global phenomenon affecting our world today. And if you don't know what climate change is yet, you are probably living under one of these. You may have heard the words climate change repeatedly on the news, but what exactly is it? According to the United Nations, climate change is defined as
long-term changes in temperatures and weather conditions. In other words, it's a visible change in temperatures around the globe, such as that from 1975 to present.
Many people tend to think climate change mainly means warmer temperatures, but this only grazes the surface of the problem. The Earth is a living system where everything is interconnected. And before you get confused, climate change is part of a natural cycle. The Earth has been cooler than it is right now, but it's also been a bit warmer too. And that is what a dynamic system like Earth does. It changes and adjusts. Evidence shows that Earth's climate changes over the years, whether from plate tectonics, volcanic eruption, or anthropogenic forcing. In fact, according to NASA, direct observations made on and above Earth's surface show that climate is changing significantly, and human activities are the primary drivers of those changes by warming the land, ocean, and atmosphere via fossil fuel use. You've likely heard about the warming of the oceans, ice sheet loss, and fires occurring more often in places around the world due to dry conditions. These things happen on a global level. Then we hear about the increase in hurricane activity and how small island developing states are the ones that will be most affected. Caribbean nations, especially low-lying islands, are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Barbados Prime Minister Mia Motley even stated that 2 degrees Celsius is a death sentence. But what exactly does that mean for us here in the Caribbean, and what would be the effect? As an ecology and environmental science student, I always had this mental block when it came to envisioning what could happen to my home in Antigua or any other island in the Caribbean by a mere 1 degree increase. But now I can see it clearly by looking at the potential effects of sea level rise in churchyards and cemeteries in Barbados. Yes, that was a shameless plug for my case study. In this case study, 17 cemeteries were selected, and this was based on their distance from the coast on a Barbados topographical map, which I will show here. So once the cemeteries fell within the first 20-meter contour interval on that map, they were selected. However, exceptions were made for 2 cemeteries, which were Christchurch Parish Church Cemetery and Christchurch Cemetery. After they were selected, their elevations and distance from the coast were then measured, and this was done using Google Earth Pro. I used the ruler tool in the application, and I started at the closest entryway for the ocean or the sea, and I put the marker there, and then I drew the line to the location of my cemetery, and Google Earth Pro gave you a very good estimation as to what that distance is. And then after that, in order for me to find the elevation of each site, I just hovered over the location. However, to ensure that the elevation was accurate or reasonable, my supervisor advised that we should ground truth each site to ensure that the elevations made sense. And so we both downloaded altimeter apps on our phones, and his own gave plus or minus 3 meter errors. And so what we did, we used his elevation and mine, and we found the average, and we used the ground truth average in order for me to get my results. After we ground truthed everything and we checked the elevations, it was then time for us to determine the age of each cemetery. Now how this was done was we went around to each grave and we looked for the different ages on the tombs, and then we determined from there. And so it's also very important for us to note the age of the grave or the site, because it gives us an indication as to how long these sites will be around, or if they will be maintained right up into the future, up to the year 2100, who knows. But these cemeteries are very important for families because they are expected to exist for decades, and they would love to be able to go back and visit their families from time to time and pay their respect. Now for those cemeteries that had way too many graves for us to look at in one visit, I used different websites in order for me to confirm which one was oldest and determine which cemetery then was the oldest cemetery out of all of them. Now, after all of the hard physical work was done, it was now time to move on to the technical/computer aspects of this case study. It was time for me to create the scenarios. Now, these scenarios would be able to tell me which sites would be inundated by when. And so I used NASA's website, and I also used Climate Central website. And I'm going to start with Climate Central first. I used 3 different scenarios from this website. Scenario 1, this was sea level rise due to a combination of tides and storm surges. So the sea level would be rising due to these factors. Scenario 2 was sea level rise due to different amounts of Antarctic ice sheet loss. And then scenario 3 was sea level rise due to different amounts of Greenland ice sheet loss. And so these different scenarios will be able to tell me which sites would be inundated and because of what. For NASA has a sea level projection tool that I will show you here. And NASA uses SSPs, or socioeconomic pathways. Now what these are, I'm going to try to break it down in layman terms. The best way that I understand it is determining how a society would behave based on its economy, and then you're going to be able to obtain greenhouse gas emission scenarios from how the society is behaving using different climate policies. There are 5 of them. Those are the 5 pathways, and out of those 5 pathways, 6 different scenarios were derived.
The global average temperature for the year 2100 is very likely to be higher by 1 degree Celsius, and this is under the best case scenario of SSP 1 to 1.9. Under the worst case scenario, which is SSP 5 to 8.5, the temperature is very likely to be higher by 4.5 degrees Celsius. Thus, by the year 2100, Greenland is projected to contribute 0.04 meters of sea level rise under the best case scenario, and the site that would be inundated is the cemetery at Maxwell Beach. Under the worst case scenario, it is projected to contribute 0.17 meters of sea level rise, and the sites that would be inundated are St. Matthias Church and once again the cemetery at Maxwell Beach. For Antarctica in the year 2100, the ice sheet loss is expected to contribute 0.12 meters of sea level rise, and the site that would be inundated is once again the cemetery at Maxwell Beach, and this is under the best case scenario. Under the worst case scenario, Antarctica ice sheet loss is projected to contribute 0.23 meters of sea level rise, and the only site that would be inundated is once again the cemetery at Maxwell Beach. Some of the oldest graves in these cemeteries or near coastal cemeteries, they have dates between 1670 and 1771. And so this tells me that these cemeteries are over 300 years old. And so 300 years into the future, these cemeteries will be underwater, or they will be inundated if temperatures are not kept at 1.5 degrees Celsius.
But just because it's so far into the future doesn't mean that we should not take action now. We should really try to follow the correct socioeconomic pathway so that the emissions that Barbados has, or the globe has, those emissions are able to keep Earth's temperature down to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was the goal of Paris Agreement. The churchyards are good. They are fixed points in determining which areas would become inundated, and so just by looking at this alone, it gave us a good idea as to which areas, how far inland, and what other areas would become inundated.
The Barbados National Energy Policy formulated a plan to be a 100% renewable energy and a carbon neutral island state by 2030. Thus, it could be postulated that Barbados will follow the SSP 1 to 1.9 pathway and achieve sea levels less than 0.18 meters, doing their part to keep sea level rise at a minimum for future generations.
We can only hope other nations work to curb sea level rise as well. Otherwise, not only parts of our heritages, but also potentially our livelihoods could be lost to the ocean.